Have you ever looked around at the shattered pieces of your life and thought, there is just no coming back from this? Have you ever made a mistake so massive, a failure so public, or a choice so devastating that you were absolutely convinced you had permanently ruined God's plan for you? We all have those moments where the regret feels completely suffocating. But what if your worst mistake isn't the end of your story? Picture the courtyard. The night air is biting, carrying a bitter chill that sinks deep into the bones. Peter is standing near a charcoal fire, rubbing his hands together, desperately trying to blend in with the shadows and the strangers. He is exhausted, terrified, and running on pure adrenaline. Just hours ago, he boldly promised he would die for Jesus. But now, when a servant girl simply points him out, panic overrides his loyalty. He denies knowing him. Not once, not twice, but 3 times, with curses spilling from his trembling lips. And then, the rooster crows. The sharp, unmistakable sound pierces the heavy silence of the early dawn. The Gospel of Luke tells us that in that exact moment, Jesus turned and looked straight at Peter. Imagine the crushing weight of that eye contact. The sheer, suffocating agony of realizing you just betrayed your best friend, your Savior, when he needed you most. Peter didn't just make a small error. He completely shattered his calling. He stumbled out into the darkness and wept bitterly, the taste of ash, an ultimate failure in his mouth. Maybe you have felt what Peter felt that night. Perhaps you are standing in the ashes of a decision you can't undo, staring at the wreckage of a relationship, a career, or a moral failure, thinking you have disqualified yourself from grace. You feel the heat of that same charcoal fire of regret, convinced that God has turned his back on you forever. But the beautiful, scandalous truth of the gospel is that God's response to our absolute worst moments isn't abandonment. It is pursuit. When we ruin everything, our first instinct is to hide. We pull back, we isolate ourselves, convinced that we are completely unworthy of love, let alone a divine calling. We sit in our shame, replaying the tape of our failure over and over again until it becomes the only song our heart knows how to sing. But look at what happens on Sunday morning. When the women arrive at the empty tomb, the angel gives them a very specific message. Mark chapter 16, verse 7 says, "But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee." Did you catch that? And Peter. Jesus singled out the one man who had failed him the most spectacularly. He made sure that heaven dispatched an angel with a personalized invitation for the disciple who was probably packing his bags to go back to his old life, absolutely certain he was no longer part of the team. God knows your name in the middle of your mess. He sees you sitting in the dark, convinced that you've ruined your own life beyond repair. And he is whispering your name with that same intentional, relentless grace. Tell my disciples, and tell you. Maybe you have stood where Peter stood, convinced that your denial, your addiction, your divorce, or your bankruptcy has permanently disqualified you from the love of God. You think your failure is a period, but God is using it as a comma. Jesus didn't wait for Peter to clean himself up, apologize, or do penance before reaching out. He pursued Peter right in the thick of his self-loathing. When you think you've ruined your life, God's first response is to call you by name, reminding you that your identity isn't anchored in your worst mistake, but in His perfect sacrifice. The second profound truth we have to grasp is that God doesn't just ignore our failures. He meets us right at the scene of the crime to heal us. Fast forward a few days. Peter has gone back to what he knows best: fishing. He has given up on ministry. He has thrown in the towel. He is out on the boat, doing exactly what he was doing before Jesus ever called him, wrapping himself in the familiar comfort of his old life. But Jesus shows up on the shoreline. And what does Jesus do? He cooks breakfast. But notice the historical and sensory details here, because they change absolutely everything. John chapter 21 tells us that Jesus had a fire of coals burning. A charcoal fire. The last time Peter stood around a charcoal fire, he was denying he ever knew Jesus. The smell of that smoke must have triggered every ounce of shame, every memory of his betrayal, rushing back into his mind like a tidal wave. Jesus recreates the exact environment of Peter's greatest failure. Not to punish him, but to completely overwrite the memory with grace. Around that fire, Jesus asks Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" 3 affirmations of love to cancel out 3 declarations of denial. Romans chapter 8 verse 28 reminds us, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." God doesn't waste our ruins. He will take the very thing that broke you, the very environment where you fell apart, and use it as the exact stage for your greatest restoration. He doesn't sweep your mistakes under the rug. He brings them into the light, sits down with you in the middle of the mess, and asks you to simply love Him again. You might think your past is a toxic wasteland, but God sees it as fertile soil for a miracle. He will meet you at your charcoal fire. This brings us to the deepest, most life-altering truth of all: the realization that God actually factors your failures into His ultimate plan for your life. We often think that our mistakes derail God's sovereignty. We act as if God is up in heaven, frantically trying to recalculate the route because we took a wrong turn. But God is never surprised by your humanity. Before Peter ever denied Jesus, Jesus already knew it was going to happen. In Luke chapter 22, verses 31 and 32, Jesus says something absolutely staggering. He says, "Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat. But I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers." Notice the phrasing there. Jesus didn't say, "if you turn back." He said, "when you have turned back." Jesus knew Peter was going to fall flat on his face. He knew Peter was going to ruin everything. Yet, He had already woven Peter's restoration into the fabric of his destiny. Your failure isn't the termination of your calling. It is the brutal, painful preparation for it. The very shattered pieces of your life that you are crying over right now are the exact materials God is going to use to build a platform of empathy, grace, and strength for others. Because who better to preach about the radical, unending forgiveness of God than the man who,